Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath with Forbes Breaking News. Thousands of people in Japan are under evacuation orders as a typhoon bears down on northern Japan. Here to explain the situation is AccuWeather lead international forecaster Jason Nicholls. Jason, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here.
You've been following the developments with this weather system overnight. Tell us, what do we need to know about this typhoon?
Right now, Typhoon Ampil is equivalent of a Category 3 hurricane in the Atlantic. So it's a very strong typhoon, not the strongest of the season so far. It was heading towards southeast Japan. It's luckily it has veered off to the east. So it missed direct landfall, but strong winds, heavy rain have affected southeast Honshu, like around the Tokyo area. That I know Tokyo has received about 3.5 inches of rain and had wind gusts close to 60 miles per hour. With this a little bit farther to the south and east of downtown Tokyo, where the storm made its closest approach, they've had a general 6 to 8 inches of rain, local amounts close to 10 inches of rain, and some wind gusts past 80 miles per hour right along the immediate southeast coast of Honshu.
80-mile-per-hour winds, 10 inches of rain, but you say this is the equivalent of a Category 3 hurricane. Can you break down the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon for those of us who aren't as in the know as you are?
It's just a naming convention. Typhoon, hurricane are basically the same thing. It's just in the West Pacific, they call them typhoons. In the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, they're known as hurricanes. So it's just a naming.
I see. So it is hurricane season here in this part of the hemisphere on the East Coast. Is it typhoon season for Japan and its neighboring countries right now?
Yes. The peak of the typhoon season in the West Pacific is pretty close to the peak season or the Atlantic hurricane season in basically June to October. But basically, you can have a tropical system in the West Pacific any time of year. It's just that the most active time of year in the West Pacific tends to be in that June through September, October time period.
And how has AccuWeather been forecasting typhoon season for Japan this year? I know we've been talking to AccuWeather about a very active hurricane season in the Atlantic. Is it the equivalent in Japan?
No, actually, the West Pacific is probably going to be another down year. It's probably like the fourth consecutive down season. So far, they're running actually well below normal so far. The one thing that may give Japan a few more impacts is that a lot of the storm systems this year, as we forecasted, are developing a little bit farther west and north than where they usually form. So that leaves the window open for maybe a few more impacts on Japan. Even though it's not a very active season, they could still get more impacts on Japan because of the shift of where the storms are developing.
So let's talk about this specific typhoon. You said it developed and it looked like it was going in one direction but changed. What is happening now, and where are you forecasting the storm system will continue to go?
It's right now, it's like I said, it's turned to the east. It avoided direct landfall in Japan. Basically tonight and this weekend, it's going to race off to the east, well east of Japan into the open North Pacific, and generally weekend as it does so, moves over cooler waters. It's going to lose some energy. And I think by the time we get into early next week, it'll transition to more of a mid-latitude cyclone and may affect the Aleutian Islands as we get into maybe around the middle of next week.
And what is AccuWeather telling residents in Tokyo and throughout the country of Japan? I mentioned the evacuation orders. We've seen flights canceled, trains canceled. So even though there hasn't been direct landfall, it still feels like a significant human impact. What more do we need to know about
that? We did give warnings well in advance that even though the storm probably wouldn't make direct impact, there would definitely be impacts, especially on the southeast corner of Japan or around the Tokyo area. I think the worst of the winds and the rain are going to be starting to wane here during the overnight hours, local time, across Japan as the storm pulls off to the east. So The worst of the storm is probably past at this point as the storm is pulling away, but there's still going to be flooding issues as river levels continue to rise. Still the risk of mudslides due to the heavy rain that's already fallen across the area. So we're not out of the woods yet as far as that concerns, like the mudslides. But the worst of the rain, I think, is probably starting to wane as the system is starting to pull away.
The worst of the rain is waning. That's a tongue twister.
Yep.
What are you forecasting in terms of future typhoon activity? I know here on the East Coast, we've seen back-to-back hurricanes that are battering some parts of the coast. Do residents in Japan need to worry about an immediate second typhoon, or travelers who are going to Tokyo?
No, it looks like once Ampil moves away, it should be quiet for a few days. There is some concern something tries to develop again in the northern Philippine Sea late next week, maybe going into the early the following week. It's hard to say at this point where it would go, but there is the potential it could impact portions of Japan, but it probably wouldn't be till maybe the very end of August or the beginning of September by the time it would get up into that area if anything happens to form. But right now, like I said, once Ampil moves away, it looks like we're going to a little bit of quieter pattern for close to a week, maybe a little bit shy of a week. But so no immediate concerns at this point. It did get very active around before Ampil formed. There was other tropical systems in the vicinity of Japan, but most of those were very weak and stayed offshore. So.
And in spite of that activity, it's still a down year, you said?
Yes, right now we're still well below normal as far as the number of storms we should have by this point in the season. So overall, it's been a quiet season. The strongest storm, no super typhoons as of yet in the West Pacific. And the strongest storm was Gamey back in July. But this one is the close second. Ampil is definitely the closest second to Gamey. Yeah.
No, go ahead. You can finish.
I know, I'm good.
Why has it been a down year in the West Pacific, but an up year in the Atlantic? Is this climate change? Is this just the vagaries of weather? Is there a broader explanation we can point to here?
Probably the biggest explanation would be the transition from El Nino to a La Nina. We're transitioning that way. La Nina tends to lead to down development in the West Pacific, but it tends to favor more development in the Atlantic. There's also some other teleconnections, global signals that are influencing, like I said earlier, a lot of the development recently has been farther north and west than where it usually is, and that's due to some ocean temperatures in the North Pacific as well, kind of shifting everything north and west, and the ocean water temperatures are not nearly as warm as what we've seen in the Atlantic, where they're like near record warmth. Right now, the cooling, especially towards the Central Pacific, is kind of helped shift everything west, and there's some warm waters in the West Pacific, close to the Philippine Sea, that South China Sea, but conditions just haven't been that favorable for systems to really spin up that much.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned the potential mudslides and the flooding that we are seeing in Tokyo and beyond, but again, this weather system veered further east than what you were originally forecasting. How much worse could it have been for residents of Tokyo if there had been direct landfall from this typhoon?
If there was even a closer passage even to the west and avoiding direct landfall, winds could have been much stronger in the Tokyo area. I think the strongest winds I saw reported in Tokyo were around 60 miles per hour. If the storm had veered maybe 50, 100 miles to the west, would have still kept the center offshore, but greater potential that wind gusts could have been 70, 75, maybe even close to 80 miles per hour in Tokyo. But a direct landfall would have been devastating, especially if it came in and near the metropolitan Tokyo area, as it had the potential to do. But luckily, the steering winds took it and kept it offshore, kept the storm center offshore.
Wow. So that was a close call. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was a close call. like I said, it did come close enough to bring heavy rains to southeast Honshu and strong wind gusts. So even with that close passage, it's still pretty good wind and rain across southeast Japan out of the system. One other interesting fact is winds around the system downslope, and there was record highs. If you went farther west, like Hiroshima got to 102, and that was all due to winds around the storm system downsloping off the mountains and led to a record high in Hiroshima. So just another offshoot of the storm system.
Wow. Jason, what else do we need to know about Typhoon Ampil and the broader weather system in the West Pacific?
Right now, like I said, Ampil is moving away, so should be quieter in the West Pacific for a time, but we'll have to keep an eye on as we especially get towards the tail end of next weekend, and into the following week. Looks like conditions could become a little bit more favorable for development in the northern Philippine Sea. At this point, it's hard to say whether it would impact Japan, but being how it'll be in the northern part of the Philippine Sea, their potential is there for another impact on Japan at some point, either late in August or beginning of September.
Jason Nicholls, lead international forecaster for AccuWeather. Thank you so much for your time today. I know you just worked the overnight shift, so we so appreciate your time.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.